Now we all know that Bowser is the big bad guy of the Super Mario series, every time he comes back to kidnap Peach or destroy the Mushroom Kingdom. However, at some point Nintendo also introduced his kid, who always tries to help his dad in his evil schemes. And while Bowser uses pure power, his son usually has a different approach when taking on Mario. Thanks to this, the fights you have with him are usually very unique, and sometimes even a bit strange. And so today we will take a look at 4 new Bowser Jr. boss battles that I have come up with. And some of these are pretty weird and completely new for Bowser Jr. as well. So, let's jump right in. Now to start off, we will talk about a fight that could bring a lot of things to the table that we have never seen before. Well, sort of. We all know who Shadow Mario is. He's a doppelganger of Mario and serves as the main antagonist of Super Mario Sunshine. And he wields the magic Paintbrush, an invention designed by Professor Egad. And with it, you can magically create large quantities of goop, which occasionally spawn lesser enemies. Now in the end, we found out that it wasn't some Mario clone, but actually a disguised Bowser Jr. But we never really fight him in this game. Nothing one-on-one where we actually attack him. Usually he just runs away. So what I want to see is an actual battle with Bowser Jr. where he uses these paint powers to attack you. And luckily enough, he still uses the thing, which we can see in the little DLC add-on for Super Mario 3D World called Bowser's Fury. So I want a fight where he uses the brush. And I think he can do some cool stuff with it, because we have seen Nintendo play around with something similar before in games like Super Mario Odyssey. Now, one thing he could do is an attack where he does a slashing motion with the brush, which will send paint flying towards you. In a way, it would be similar to the Wind Cleaver from Breath of the Wild. That can hit you from a distance thanks to the wind slash it sends towards you. And another ability could be that he paints certain enemies, which will spawn a bunch of them. And those will obviously attack you. Stuff like this would be a good fit. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. You can add so much more to this fight. Just look at Super Mario Sunshine. There's enough stuff in that game to put in a boss fight like this. And of course, they could also come up with more stuff. We can see that the paint in Sunshine can turn into all kinds of things. Now on to our next one. A version of Bowser Jr. that uses a cool new gadget, however this one is very different compared to all the others ever seen before. I want to see Bowser Jr. use some sort of Hellcar with all kinds of deadly weapons on it in a boss fight. And it should be set in a circular arena. Now you might wonder, why does that even matter? But you will understand in a second. The car kind of looks like the Koopa King car from Mario Kart Double Dash, but now it has flamethrowers on the side. And in addition to that, it has 4 bill blasters on the back that shoot bullseye bills, which is a type that follows you instead of just flying forward. And last but not least, the car has spikes on the side of the wheels, so touching it is not a good idea. Now during the fight he will drive in circles with his flamethrower turned on, and every now and then he will drive straight at you. And you can deal damage by jumping on top of him, which you need to time well or you're in a bad place. Aside from that, he will move to the other side of the arena and shoot 4 bullet bills at you, which you need to avoid. But that's not simple, because sometimes Bowser Jr. will try to ram into you as well. And that's basically the fight. And yes, a circular arena is crucial, because it allows Bowser Jr. to drive around with ease and pull off certain attacks. In a lot of ways, this is kind of like Mad Max, but this time it's Bowser Jr. and Mario. However, the arena and car should be like that movie. It would certainly give it a cool aesthetic that we have never really seen before in a Super Mario game. But I'm sure we will never ever get anything like this. In a lot of ways, this idea is just too foreign for a company like Nintendo. Now on to our next one. A fight that might not seem fitting for a character like Bowser Jr., but it would work. Now during New Super Mario Bros., Bowser is the boss of the first world, but he falls into a pit of lava and is turned into a dry bones-like monster called Dry Bowser, which was certainly new. And then later on, at the end of World 8, Bowser Jr. revives his father by throwing him into a pot filled with some sort of magic potion, restoring him to his former self. But this time he's larger and more powerful than before. Back then, when we first saw this, it was truly new. Normally, using magic like this was only for characters like Kamek, but now Bowser Jr. messes around with stuff like that, and I want to see him use it again. I want a fight where Bowser Jr. uses this huge pot filled with magic potion, and Nintendo could do quite a lot with this. Just imagine, you enter an arena somewhere, and Bowser Jr. is there with a huge pot, stirring the potion inside of it, and then you take him on, with the fight having two stages. First, you have one where he runs around the pot and tries to splash you with magic potion. Now, if it hits you, then it will have a random effect. For example, it will slow you down a lot, it will damage you, or it even gives you a power-up. And if it hits the ground, it will spawn 1 to 3 random enemies that will attack you right away. So overall, this stage is just Bowser Jr. running around this pot and jumping on top to splash magic potion at you, with some random enemies running around to annoy you a bit and possibly make it easier for Bowser Jr. to hit you. And then in the second phase, Bowser Jr. drinks some of the potion, and then all of a sudden, he gets wings and can shoot huge fireballs at you. And every now and then, he will swoop down, allowing you to jump on top of him. Now, after this phase, he is defeated. Now, obviously, this fight would be a bit chaotic and very unpredictable to say the least. But that's also what makes it very fun, especially when you replay the game, because this boss battle can still be surprising and interesting. The effects of the potion are always different after all, and this goes for the enemies that can spawn as well. Some of those might even help you, like Koopas and Bob-ombs, because those give you stuff that you can throw at Bowser Jr. So I do hope we see something like this one day. Now on to our next battle. Our very last one. A fight where Bowser Jr. does something very strange. Now in New Super Mario Bros. Wii, we see Bowser do something very strange. When he plummets into an abyss, he gets saved by Kamek, because he casts a spell over the chasm that Bowser has fallen down in. And seconds later, he reappears, but now he's gigantic. After this, he proceeds to chase after you, all while spitting massive fireballs, clawing away at the walls, and leaping over towards you. Now, this was the first time ever where we saw some sort of Mega Bowser, and in later games we saw this form return again and again and again. It's actually quite popular. A lot of people love these fights. However, we have never seen Bowser Jr. do a similar thing in any of the games. So I think it's about time that we saw some sort of Mega Jr. that tries to crush or destroy you. And this could actually fit very well with the ideas of the previous fight I talked about. You know, the one where he used a magic potion of sorts? He could, for example, later on in the game, return after his big defeat, and then he wants a rematch. And so when you walk in, he grabs a flask filled with magic potion out of his pocket, if he has those even, and drinks all of it. At that point, parts of his body will start to get bigger one by one. First his arms, then legs, and then everything else. But he looks a bit odd, because some parts of him got a bit bigger than others. There are side effects, basically. So he looks a bit like a Frankenstein monster, looking very weird and maybe even a bit creepy. Aside from that, he's also not that big. While Bowser turns into a 20-meter tall King Kong-like monster, his son only becomes about as big as Petey Piranha. So he isn't really huge, but still a lot bigger than Mario. Now at that point, he will just attack you. For example, by swiping at you with his claws, smacking down his arms on the ground really fast, jumping around, and shooting fireballs. And you deal damage by jumping on top of him or shooting something at him. You know, just the normal stuff. In a lot of ways, this fight is a different take on the gigantic Bowser boss battles. But this time, it's on a smaller scale and a bit more goofy. And personally, I love that. Bowser Jr. has always been a bit wacky, so this would be very fitting. Although I think the spooky angle could also be cool. And to be honest, it would also be something new for once. Bowser Jr. always uses machines and robots after all. We have never really had a one-on-one fight with him like we do when fighting his dad, so it would be a nice change of pace. Now we've reached the end of this video. Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below what you think of my ideas. and be sure to share yours. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like because it helps me out a ton, like the algorithm loves them. Subscribe, click the bell button, and I love you.